I recently applied for a DCS group that, surprisingly enough, flies at a schedule comparable to mine. That's a rare thing. They use the Syria map for the initial checkride. I applied as an F4 Wizzo since playing as Rio is too easy, and the objective is dropping some bombs and a bit of air-to-air. So why not combine business with pleasure and put together a low-level flight plan? For the occasion, I had to expand my low-level tools to the Syria map. What follows is the first test on the map, and spoiler alert, it actually helped me to spot an error I promptly sorted. The departure field is in Kirlik Air Base, located in the south of Turkey. Targets are usually located around the Geçitkale airport, northeast of the island of Cyprus. Since the group is quite relaxed, and it is an initial flight, I opted for something easy. The tricky part is finding a proper penetration point. The easiest solution is coming straight in from the Mare Nostrum, but that would be boring. So I spotted that nice coastline near Vasilea and used it to somewhat funnel the pilot on the correct heading for the first waypoint. That's also a nice play for an INS Visfix update. To keep things easy, I used a visible reference point, that small lake about a minute into the flight. Then I went southeast for a bit of sightseeing towards another lake. The plan was to avoid the capital of Cyprus, Nicosia. From waypoint 2, the journey is simple until we hit the tiny airstrip of Kingsfield. From there, due north for a big lake, which is located close to the initial point. I'm not a fan of a 90-degree turn plus acceleration from 420 to 480 knots, but this is a simple test to familiarise with the group and see if the tools work fine. It doesn't really matter if we miss the target or run dry. Besides that, the terrain is a bit of a problem. It is not as flat as the Persian Gulf desert is, so reference points may be difficult to spot. Moreover, roads are tiny, definitely not autobahn size, and the same applies to rivers. As discussed in the low-level series a few months ago, references that look good on a map do not necessarily work from 50 meters, especially when flying at 800 kilometers per hour. Let's see how the test went. As a friendly reminder, this is the second time I've ever piloted something like this myself, and a toddler has greater piloting skills than myself. The tricky part of doing this alone is monitoring speed, heading and altitude, whilst monitoring the clock and looking outside for visual references in an unfamiliar terrain. Practice is required to do this properly. I use the info bar to simplify things because again the goal is to check whether the tools are fine. Moreover, I did not have to scan for threats. After the first leg, I noticed immediately something odd about my tool, namely the length of the straight leg portion equals the total. I simply referenced the wrong data cell, but I realized only later. As mentioned, the parameter I struggled the most to keep in check is the speed. Now, legs are short, ergo the impact of a few knots is not huge, but in some cases I ended up 10, 20 or even more knots faster or slower than the planned speed. This is not ideal, of course. The second leg was somewhat uneventful. Roads perpendicular to the route are handy ways to monitor the progress. Several were present in this leg, which minimised the navigation errors. Rivers, railway lines and defined and isolated villages are other recognisable landmarks. I must say that I did not expect the lake to be almost hidden by the hills. Note to myself, check the topography better next time. The third leg was the longest and the simplest in terms of piloting, with a gentle heading compensated by working the throttle, which I did badly, but we know already why. There were plenty of landmarks to help the navigation. Something to keep in mind is that we do not want too many of them. For instance, a couple of small built-up areas are easy to recognize. Dozens of them become confusing. All was good until it was time to find the designated landmark indicating the turn, Kingsfield Airport. I miserably failed to spot it. What to do in these cases? Well, I looked around, noticed another pair of recognisable landmarks, looked at the clock and decided to turn. In particular, I noticed the coastline, the sizable town and another lake. Delaying turns is not necessarily a mission-breaking issue if doglegs are present, but messing up the last turn towards the IP was a bit embarrassing. I found myself in an odd position. I had to compensate for the incorrect heading plus time lost on top of putting the aeroplane back where it was supposed to be to intercept the initial point. To do that, I took advantage of another landmark, and I turned to place the big lake on my right hand side as the flight plan described. All things considered, it worked okay. Eventually I skipped the dive toss delivery, as this was not the point of the test. I'm quite happy about the test, not really for my piloting skills, but because it highlighted a problem in the visualization of the straightaway length, which I have solved. The updated tool and the Syria map are freely available to download, imprimis, to the fantastic Patreon and YouTube members and supporters, and later to all of you. Thanks for watching, and take care.